the standard workforce playbook doesn't just underperform, frankly, it kind of fails.
A lot of the areas in Alaska aren't even on a road system. You have to get there however you can get there. A snow machine, a boat, a plane. But I often think of the definition of insanity. We have to change or I'm going to lose my mind.
I had been already working in disability services for 20 plus years, really working a lot in workforce and DSP workforce. And I was starting to feel that kind of burnout. And part of it was we were having the same conversations with the same people over and over and over again.
In this field, there's not really a best practice playbook or script. So the perfectionist in me wanted to do it right. And I quickly realized there wasn't a right. There was just a different direction. Oftentimes people are so rigid. How's it going to work? How's it going to work? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, we're just going to start and kind of pivot.
Hello and welcome to IDD Leader, where each week I help you kick staff turnover to the curb and build the kind of workplace that attracts and retains the best people in human services. I'm your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. Most leadership advice assumes a proven playbook that if you can find it and follow it, you'll be good to go. But for my guests today, and for any of you that are leading in rural IDD services, there's not exactly a playbook for that. In fact, my guests have been trying to write it, not on purpose, but just by taking one innovative step after the next, not as a convenience, but as a survival tactic. I'm honored to have on the show Kim Champney. She's the head of the Alaska Association on Developmental Disabilities, and Amanda Elder, the executive director at Frontier Community Services, both, of course, located in Alaska. This conversation is part 1 of 2, and in it, they're going to share a story of how a leader literally got kicked by someone being supported, and it was the best thing that could have happened, about how a promotion went completely sideways, but then it opened the door for a totally different job description that was so much better. And you're also going to hear how in Alaska, direct support professionals are getting a real seat at the table. Well, without further ado, let's dive into today's conversation. You're both leading in a context where the standard workforce playbook doesn't just underperform, frankly, it kind of fails. Alaska, right? The last frontier, so to speak, for us that are on the mainland or the continental United States. But this is my question. At some point, most leaders, in my experience, they either burn out trying to force an old model or they have to do something different. And I'm curious, what has made you guys choose different?
Well, first of all, I have to say, in Alaska, we call you the lower 48. You're the lower 48.
Lower. We're just low. That's true.
You're just
We're
the lower
outside with a capital O.
Good. I like it. All right.
That's a technical term, outside.
Okay.
Mhm.
I feel like I just got mildly initiated, just slightly in. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I can kind of start with that. I think just being in Alaska, we have to be pretty innovative anyways. A lot of the areas in Alaska aren't even on a road system. You have to get there however you can get there. A snow machine, a boat, a plane. You know, we're kind of used to adapting. But I often think of the definition of insanity. And once I loop that like 4 times, the hamster wheel of insanity, we have to change or I'm going to lose my mind. So that's usually my indicator that we just have to try something different. And for the most part, everyone's like willing to like, yes, let's try something different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I was thinking about this question, I thought about a pivotal moment for me in my thinking. And it was when I had a friend who said, you should come to this economic development conference. And I had been already working in disability services for 20 plus years and really working a lot in workforce and DSP workforce. And I was starting to feel that kind of burnout. And part of it was we were having the same conversations with the same people over and over and over again. And so I went to this economic development conference and I met all these entrepreneurs who were talking about sprints and how you have to fail multiple times before you succeed, like fail fast and all of these entrepreneurial language. It was completely a different energy and vibe, and ended up actually co-founding a little incubator that was focused on healthcare and DD services with some other entrepreneurs. And I think that the lesson is that we are small and there's an advantage, like Amanda was saying too. We have such an amazing community of people. Like we know each other. We talk about, Alaska being this huge state that's really like a small town. And we have to work, I think, at hearing those other voices and so getting in the room with other people. I also have really appreciated going to conferences and, things like Anchor, listening to IDD leader, or, hearing what other people are doing, because I think when you get to that point where you're like, oh my gosh, it's the same thing. And we've gotta try a different way. We don't have to come up with it ourselves. There's other people who really can do that too. So that's what came to my mind.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I just would love to just jump right in with that for a moment. How has that informed what you're doing there now? Maybe even just share for a moment what your role is and what, the work that you're doing, but then how is kind of that entrepreneurial mindset or approach to things, what has that shaped, if anything? And it's okay if it didn't shape anything. I'm sure it's affected you one
Yeah.
way or the other, but
Well, no, it's totally affected me. So I had worked at a nonprofit home and community-based service provider for 20 years. That was the beginning of my career. And the day-to-day is pretty scripted unless you shake things up, unless you have a leader who shakes things up, which I think Amanda is a leader who shakes things up. So you can hear from her next. But I was working in a pretty traditional, they'd been in this community a long time. And I think being exposed to those entrepreneurs really made me recognize the value of that. They work very hard at innovation. Design thinking is has a whole suite of tools around how to brainstorm and be creative, and it was really a turning point. So I moved from being working at a nonprofit provider into being actually a consultant for about 6 years, where I was managing a lot of projects and facilitating development of projects around Alaska, a lot of work for the association, provider association. And as a self-employed consultant, that was that kind of got me into this entrepreneurial mindset too of thinking through and really doing a lot of strategic planning with organizations around, how do you diversify your revenue? What is the way of the future? How are you going to be prepared for things to pivot and change? And using some of the design thinking tools like the persona development, what are the people who need services and the different personas they have, and just all sorts of tools that I learned from the entrepreneurial landscape. And then what happened was my good friend was retiring as the Provider Association exec from ADD and really encouraged me, among others, to think about that. And I think that the Provider Association is such a great setting because I, unlike Amanda, don't have to cover 12-hour shifts at the drop of a hat. I don't have to worry about having to, terminate somebody for whatever. I have some space, some brain space, so I can bring in some of those entrepreneurial ideas and innovations and work with amazing leaders like Amanda, who I think of as like an early adopter. And we can pilot things and demonstrate that there is a different way to do it. It's just been a really nice, I think, melding of what kind of excited me anyway. And now I have this space and structure to do that with providers.
that's really cool.
And
Amanda,
I can
yeah,
just
go ahead.
dovetail right with that. So I've been at the provider agency for 25 years, but I've been at the executive director, I don't know, like 11. And my background is in early childhood special ed. So I jumped into this role not willingly. I, but we don't have a lot of options. So we got to that time where we were going to have to start recruiting from the lower 48. And that made me really nervous because I've been in my
Deal breaker
community.
right there, obviously.
Well, it's a special kind of person to live in Alaska. And oftentimes we have people come up and they have a vision of what they think living in Alaska is going to look like. And they're either going to make it 2 years and leave or make it 2 years and love it. And we were very nervous about that happening at this executive level. So I said, yes, I will do it. And I didn't have the background or the expertise at all, but I did have the passion to learn and to say, I don't know what I'm doing. So I think that was one of the things. I met Kim early on because she was in a provider agency too. So every time she had one of these moments where we can kind of join collectively and kind of talk through new ideas, I was like, sign me up. I will model. I will be the pilot. Let me try that. Because in this field, there's not really a best practice playbook or script. We're developing those as a system, but it's not nearly as developed as special education. So the perfectionist in me wanted to do it right. And I quickly realized there wasn't a right. There was just a different direction. And maybe you get it right for a moment and that won't last very long. Like maybe it was right for 5 years and now we got to pivot because you're running that insanity wheel again. It's not working. So just recognizing that and being willing to jump in without having the complete step book that goes with your strategic plan. Oftentimes people are so rigid. How's it going to work? How's it going to work? And I'm like, I don't know. Like we're just going to start and kind of pivot as we go.
Yeah, what you're speaking to there is like once you reach the edge of the map and then you're still going, and then at that point you're like, oh, well, I guess someday in the future there might be a map for this, but for now we're just hitting new terrain. I think that I mean there's similar struggles across so many agencies across this whole field where there's people are short staffed, they're putting out fires on a daily basis. Then there's things that just kind of clog up the pipeline, right? Something that ideally would have gotten solved at this one level of the organization gets bumped up and then it escalates again. I'm curious. I'm sure you've felt those pressures, both of you, in your roles at providers. How do you think? How do you think you can give yourself permission to innovate when it feels like the house is on fire? Or what is the path off that hamster wheel? Be another way to put it.
Well, I think for me, I have a really great team around me. And sometimes I hear different words than they're actually saying, but I was on a meeting with someone I work with, and someone said, how does this work? You have this huge vision. I said, I had this vision to do this, and I was totally supported by my team. And he said, yep, it's her vision, and I just work here to make it happen for her. And sometimes you just need that team that just jumps in with you without pushing back so much. Like, I love that they push back a little and ask the questions, but they're also willing to go on the journey with me. And we all are okay with failing
Hmm.
because you can always go back and do it the way you were doing it.
Wow. I think that's worth highlighting. Yeah. Getting comfortable with failing. I'm sure that came up, Kim, with once you get around entrepreneurs, you just start to realize that failure is actually not just tolerated, it's almost celebrated because it is the path to innovation.
Right. Which is really difficult in disability services because human lives, people are very vulnerable. There's so much risk. That has been that's been challenging to find leaders like Amanda, I think is one who is comfortable with the possibility of failing and managing that risk. And being thoughtful about it. I mean, really taking measure. I think there are ways you can manage risk, but there are some providers that are just overwhelmed just with the system as it is, where the idea of taking something new on and it might failing is just doesn't feel like the right use of resources. But then we're stuck. We're stuck with what we have today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Can either of you share a time when you took a risk and it didn't work out? I mean, I don't want to like bring up like the worst thing that ever happened, but I think it is permission giving, and that's why I think it's worth asking because I'm sure that someone that's listening is probably sitting on something and wondering, is it worth taking the risk or not? And no one can answer that for them, right? Because they're off the map too. But I think sometimes hearing what about that can be helpful. Again, no pressure, but if you have something, I'd love to know about it.
Well, I have one, and it was when I was new into this, and I went to a conference to learn best practice strategies, and I remember just coming back on fire, ready to innovate, change. I could see everything we wanted to do differently. Um, and I talk about this frequently. I moved really fast, and I didn't communicate with all the different groups as well as I should have. I thought I was. But there was a part of me that maybe thought I got this role, this title of executive director. Maybe I had more decision making authority or power than the people we support. And so we really wanted to move in a direction of person directed services. We all agreed, we all had the same goal in mind, but it wasn't a complete failure. But there were times that I know I failed as a leader because I didn't engage and ask all the right questions. And I share this in one of the presentations, and I have permission to share this. One of the people we were supporting, like, I was so proud of myself. Like, we were doing good work. And she looked really mad in the lobby, disgruntled. And I knelt down and I said, "How's it going?" in my high pitched, kind of ableist voice. And she kicked me. She kicked me really hard. And we often share that story of that's the kick that really changed the culture because it made me realize that even a good intentioned leadership change, if not done well, and engaging all partners is a failure.
Hmm.
Um, and then that really kind of sparked another insight into our culture at Frontier because the person that was supporting her said, "Do you want to press charges? I can call the police. That's assault." And I said, "No, no, that I needed that kick. Thank you." Um, so sometimes those failures have to be a kick in the face, and other times they're very subtle, and other times they're a partial failure. But you have to be open to reflecting and seeing your failures. That's often where people miss it, is you've really got to go back and do some self-reflection.
And can I just ask Amanda to share, so that person who kicked you, who has been supported by your agency probably more than 20 years, I
35
mean,
years now.
35 years, and for many of those years in and out of, lots of mental health struggles and really a lot of challenges. Recently, now has been just so many good things happening, and it really comes from that kick. Like
Hmm.
just recently, you all got an invitation, right, to do another national presentation.
Yeah, we've been doing national presentations together, and that's kind of the premise of our presentation is good intentions kind of gone awry a little bit without engaging the people we support in decision making about their own life. If you think about it, all our organizational decisions, it's not like we're building widgets and it's no big thing. If we make the wrong decision or one that could be made differently, it impacts people. So everyone has to be involved with, we all agree this is the decision we want to make. So we do present together. And she's
Hmm.
grown so much through this too, because she's never been given the permission to use her voice in a way that redirected an outcome, if that makes sense. Like sometimes we listen to the people we support, but it doesn't change. Her voice, the first time she saw it have an impact where it made change, was very powerful. And she has found her voice now. She's going to be presenting at a conference in August in Georgia.
Wow. Wow. That's really, I mean, I don't mean this to sound trite, but that's honestly really inspiring. I mean, it really is to hear what a full circle experience what you just described. Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was not strategically planned.
Yeah.
It it just
Kicks
kind of
rarely are.
It just kind of organically happened. But you could see that decision right there when the DSP said, "Do you want me to call the police?" If I went this way, outcome would have been totally different than if I would have went the other way.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times we don't know till hindsight how impactful certain decisions are or what path it ends up leading us down.
For sure.
Now, we had met prior to this, and you, Amanda, had shared with me about Kyle, and I would love for listeners to hear, who he was when you first met him, who he is now, and you described something about a real shift when it comes to even the paradigm for jobs or creating jobs around people. I'd love to hear about it again.
This is actually my favorite story because it's 13 years in the making. So we've got some context to pull from. Um, Well, we're a nonprofit in a very small rural community, and we were doing our recruitment fair, which is really just putting up a tent and grilling hot dogs and hoping people show up and we can hire them on the spot. Like we were ready to hire them on the spot.
Yeah.
So Kyle was one of those young people that came to our hiring fair, mainly, I think, just for the hot dog. But he was 18. And he shared that he was the sibling of someone who experienced a traumatic brain injury. So he's very familiar with supporting his sibling. And that always like light bulb, yes. So he was hired on the spot and he was an amazing direct support professional for 5 years. Amazing. Um, I loved the way he engaged with the people and was so positive and empowering for them to find their voice. But he was totally comfortable just being a DSP forever. And it simultaneously happened at the same time when Kim was bringing in a DSP kind of to Alaska and helping us develop our own. I don't know if they call it an association. What do they call it, Kim? It's not an
There, we
association.
call it an advisory committee, kind
Yeah,
of a DSP think tank.
Yeah, so Kim was creating that, and I was like, she said, of course, Amanda, do you have any DSPs do you think would be great for the think tank? And I said, of course. And I volunteered Kyle, and I frequently do this where I will volunteer people without asking them because I know it's his strength. But he was really anxious because it pushed him outside of his comfort zone. But he was on AADSP and started to hear how his voice started to matter. And
Mm,
he's wanted to grow professionally in our agency. And our growth path, our career ladder in this field is often just to supervisor or manager. And he tried that out and he was no good at that. He wanted to be good at that, but he was so compassionate and strength based that he had a hard time, having those tough conversations you have to have with employees or looking at the fiscal note. If you make this decision, it's going to impact in a negative way. So we got to where we were really like not enjoying each other anymore. But I would hear him present at conferences about his work as a direct support professional. So I started to think about his strengths only in isolation, just the way we do with the people we support. And I created a new job description for him where he
mm.
is our primary DSP trainer now. And he also carries their supervision for 90 days. So we get that continuity of this very positive person. Because oftentimes when you hire somebody new, they're very nervous to ask questions because they don't want to fail. And if you get a really strong leader from the get-go that isn't wrapping your arms around them, we scare them off. I'm a
Yeah.
very intense, direct leader. Having me as a supervisor the first 90 days is pretty hard. You want Kyle. He's going to teach you everything to be successful. So I think, it's a different way of thinking as a leader that just because we have this career path, and it doesn't mean a great DSP is going to be a great DSP supervisor, but they can definitely be a great leader.
So this is, I mean, I remember that story has stuck with me since you first shared it, but it does raise a question for me. What would you say to a leader who thinks something like, well, that sounds really great, but we wouldn't be able to do that here?
Well, I think that's a cop out. I think that's a cop out. I think oftentimes we get stuck in what we think is the best way. And oftentimes, I know when I started as the executive director, we hired a professional trainer. Like we were paying him like $100 an hour to do training for us, but wasn't a DSP. Had never worked in the field, didn't have any continuity or longevity where he could continue working with these people. He just gave them great ideas and was like, peace out. Good luck with those great strategies. I hope they work. you know? So I think sometimes that's a cop out because we are afraid it won't work. And again, I go back to if it doesn't work, we just go back to the old model. But that person was worth gambling on. And you can kind of feel it in your bones when it's worth the gamble.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it's a pretty neat extension of person-centeredness, right? Person-centeredness when it comes to the people we support, but then how about for the people that work there, right? Um, I heard somebody was sharing how, at the end of the day, everybody wants to have their best life possible. Those we support, but also those that work there. And I mean, gosh, for a lot of direct support professionals are, you know, on various forms of government assistance. I mean, the gap between DSP wages and living wages is such a huge gap across the whole country. And so, yeah, to have something that actually is shaped to play to someone's strengths,
Mhm.
I mean, right now it sounds like a positive outlier, and in sharing it here, I hope that it's inspiring and gets the ball rolling for other people. But hopefully down the road, this won't be such an outlier to have that as a thing.
And to allow our employees to be advocates for those employees. Oftentimes, Kyle, he's notorious for crossing boundaries with good intention. Like he is a helper to the core. But when he's in this role helping employees, like he will really find resources for them and they feel comfortable going to him to say, I'm struggling. I don't have diapers for my child. What can we do? So he really takes the struggle and helps us create new incentive programs. So ever, Kyle brought me the diaper story, and I, of course, bought diapers for one of our DSPs that was struggling at the time. But we created a new benefit. So every DSP or any really employee that has a baby gets gifted $250 worth of diapers and wipes on Frontier. You just come get those. And
If
that
I
was
work,
Amanda
from
is
Kyle.
very creative
gonna
with
say
her incentives. Yeah.
if I worked there, you guys would be definitely a little short on some money with the diapers because I have 8 kids, so
And
so
and you
yeah. But
think
what a blessing it would
yeah,
be if I was in
you
that yeah. What a
yeah, and
blessing.
you giggle, but a lot of our DSPs have a lot of children, and getting a $250 bulk of
Huge.
diapers delivered to your doorstep, that sometimes is the one incentive that they'll remember in the back of their mind, more so than health benefits that cost a heck of a lot more.
Yeah. No, but it has such an emotional impact too. Like you see me as a person.
Yeah.
I'm not just a unit of, you know,
And I wouldn't
ratio
have known
keeping or whatever.
yeah, and I wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for Kyle coming to me and he's like, "Amanda, what can we do?"
Yeah. So that's cool. I love how it went from one situation to then rolling something out that's repeatable and that's making an ongoing impact. That's cool. Kim,
And I think, oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to comment on, that the diaper came, benefit came from listening to what a DSP really needed and responding to that. And one of the things that, as I was listening to Amanda talk, I've heard from the DSPs I meet with on a regular basis say there's so many parallels to the DSP's role in the system with people who receive services as well. It's like nothing about us without us. We want a seat at the table. We want to be valued for who we are. We want to impact how services are delivered. They have the DSP think tank that I meet with regularly has talked about really the parallels and partnering with self advocates because they're in some ways have so many of the same requests of the system.
Hmm. I want to hear more about that. That's actually where I was just about to ask you is about the Alliance of Direct Support Professionals.
Hmm.
There's kind of two angles that I'm curious about. Firstly, I'm curious what can a provider organization do at the organizational level if they want to kind of run with this idea of a DSP think
Hmm.
tank? And then secondly, is what you're doing there, do you think that it could work in other states or is it working? You might very well know, maybe this is already happening in other states, but is there something here that could be a model for other provider associations to help facilitate across the country?
Yeah, I really think so. I have done some presentations nationally on that, and I know there are some states that do have DSP organizations. There are some facets of ours that I think I've really tried to promote that I think are unique and have been really great. We um we kicked off, and I think it was 2018 was our first initial gathering. So we've been doing it a while now, and we asked providers like Amanda, kind of very engaged, active providers, to think about who would be a DSP leader in from their team, and then we have committed, AADD as an association has committed to treating that team just like any other board. So they have strategic retreats every year, pretty much, at least one day, sometimes 2 days, where they talk about what is your vision, what's your strategic priorities, how are we going to get there. We've done environmental scans, a SWOT analysis on the DSP workforce. Just as I would facilitate a nonprofit board, I have done that with this group. We have not had any term limits. We're starting to talk about that, but we've kind of had this core group of people over the years. A few people have come and gone, but I mean, Kyle, who is the young, who, at age 18, or I think he was maybe 21 when he came to the retreat, or 22, was much younger than we had. I mean, we have a woman right now who's 79, who's just talking about, maybe it's time for me to retire, but we have watched Kyle blossom where he didn't want to be the public speaker, and now he grabs the microphone and does a beautiful job talking about, from a very big picture perspective, the work of the DSP. And I think it's because every other week I spend time with this group of DSPs talking about, we always have some sort of project in the works. And so I think we've had the same group over the years, the same core group. They have grown in how they see the system and their understanding of the system. The association commits time and resources to them, so we've supported them. We've written grants to support their activities. We've received funding to send them to NADSP conferences. They've presented at the NADSP conference as a group about the work they've done in Alaska. They have presented, like the very first time we had them present to our AADD meeting, it was during COVID. And it was our first virtual, we had a fully virtual provider meeting. I don't know if Amanda remembers this, but we had a panel, and everyone, so we came up with this idea. They were going to introduce themselves not by the agency they were employed by, but as members of AADSP, and they were going to speak their mind. And we asked really hard questions, like, what is demoralizing to you as a DSP? In your experience, what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes providers make? How do you think that the workforce, issues could be solved? And we've done those panels now multiple times over the years. And I know, I know it's impacted Amanda. Like, there was one DSP, not an employee at her organization, but who told the provider, or the leaders who were gathered for our fall meeting, why do you not include DSPs at the table when you're making decisions around changes in policy or process? Why do you not have a DSP on your leadership team? Because that would really make a change. And I had multiple providers come up later and say, I never thought about doing it, or I didn't really think we could until I heard that. And now I'm hearing that kind of engagement. But I don't know that the message wouldn't have been the same if I said, hey, one of the best practices is having your DSPs at the table. But it was this very unscripted, like, passionate and a little bit emotional, like, why are we not at the table eye to eye? It's been very powerful. And as a model, I think, why would you not have a model like that, where they have informed the work of our association and really redirected directions our state was going in? They now are recognized by our state leaders who know them by name, legislators who know them by name. I get excited. I could talk about it the whole hour, so I'll stop talking now.
And they come with their matching swag, so they're easy to identify.
They love their sweatshirts. Yes,
Oh,
they do.
nice.
They've designed a logo. They really love that.
As a provider, though, it is hard to get DSPs at the table. Logistically, it's hard. Do we do services, or do we talk about policies? So, because I've tried it a couple different ways and have not been totally successful in getting the purest form of a DSP at the table. But what I do have is this created position that Kyle holds now, to where he, in essence, becomes the voice of all DSPs. So he's at the table. He has a position
Okay.
that allows him to have that voice for them, and he will call and ask them. But it doesn't mean, it's again doing it differently. It doesn't mean a seat at the table is an actual butt and chair at table, but that your voice is heard. So Kyle represents on all policies for us.
Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think you're right though. That tension, because for many providers, it's such a struggle to make sure that services are happening at the quality they need to and not being interrupted and this kind of thing. And when there's high coverage needs, it's easy for not in a, I mean, it's not a bad thing that people have good intentions, but it's easy for those to just go by the wayside because
Mhm.
the immediate needs can be so paramount.
Right.
Uh,
And
And
not
they res-
every oh, sorry, go ahead.
and they respond differently when we put them in our environment. Does that make sense? When you're put around a table of other, uh, they call us like upper management, they don't speak their mind as clearly because Kyle goes to where they're at, where they're working. And I think he gets their purest voice in the context of their daily work too.
Yeah, I was going to say along those lines, not every DSP wants to be the representative voice at the policy table for sure. And we have had DSPs who have expressed an interest in AADSP, but they don't last because they really are like, I really just want to be providing support to people and I don't necessarily want to be part of these conversations. But there are DSPs out there who are outstanding at it. And so you have to find those folks who thrive on being that leader, who really listen and can represent the voices of DSPs, who want their perspective to be shared, but maybe they don't want to be in the meeting in the room. And I think that takes some time and work and evolution. So the first person you try might not be the best fit. But I do think there are those DSP leaders out there. And you have to look for them.
Yeah, and that gets right back to what you guys were sharing a few minutes ago about how it's not about fitting everybody into the exact same expectations because
Mhm.
it doesn't work that way. We know that intuitively, but then sometimes we can kind of almost forget it when we're trying to play things out. And not everybody that promotion shouldn't look like everyone has to then become a manager in order to be, to
Right.
promote or to advance their career. I mean, this is what I'm hearing is kind of in the same lines of that. Yeah, not everyone wants to be that liaison or that advocate or that, the one with the mic. Wow, wow, wow. No map, no playbook, but no problem. Well, okay, maybe there are still problems, but hearing how they're overcoming these things is so inspiring. I can't wait to bring back part 2. That'll be the next episode that releases, which is a week from now, if you're catching this on the day of release. And I always try to leave you with an action move. I'm really thinking about what Amanda said when I asked her, well, what about a provider that says, we're not sure if we can do that here, or we're not sure how that would work. And she just says, hey, that's a cop out. I love that. And here's what I'm going to give you as the action move. No excuses. I'm giving you permission to say there's no excuses. You might only see the mountain, not the way to get up the mountain. But what if you gave yourself permission to just brainstorm, to dream, to pull in the smartest and best people that you know and say, we have to conquer this thing. Now let's figure out how. And to just start climbing that mountain. So there you go. That's your action move. Also, I want to leave you with a free resource. It directly relates to another story that came up in today's conversation, which is when they talked about Kyle and how he got promoted, but it was a bad fit. A lot of times, frontline supervisors, they get promoted because they were the best at being direct support professionals. And then they're like, whoa, what about this managing people part? Well, I have a resource directly to help with that. It's the 7 quiet danger signs your frontline supervisors are burning out their staff and what to do about it. Those people dynamics can be awfully tricky and they lead to a lot of unnecessary turnover and drama and just drain the overall system. And so I created a resource around that. You can get it for free at iddleader.com/burnout. Well, until next time, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.